Okay, so we tried to record a whole episode and the mic, something fucked up, and now we're just going to talk about something completely different.
Yeah, God willing, you know.
Yeah, inshallah.
I think most conservatives are really dumb.
I think most conservative pundits and politicians are really dumb.
People who claim to be conservatives are dumb.
People who claim to be conservatives on like a public platform and get money from conservative politicians to spread their viewpoints are mostly dumb. But I honestly don't think they're dumb. I think that they're
misguided.
Yes, financially misguided.
I like that term.
Financially incentivized.
I'm not corrupt. I'm financially misguided.
Yeah. And I won't... I feel like we've talked enough shit about liberals to move on to conservatives for a little bit. But I'm not going to act like it's only conservatives that behave in this way. But most political pundits, most political speakers on the internet, on cable television, whoever the fuck watches that still...
Yeah.
are paid by somebody.
We saw it with Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
Tucker Carlson was like 40% of Fox News' viewer base, and they fired him because of a speech he gave, which I listened to. It was a very good speech. I recommend you listening to it, and anyone else listening to his final speech. I think it was for the Heritage Organization, because that's where he started.
I feel like Tucker Carlson is a exception to the rule. It seems odd that it would be this way, but people who are born into wealth, Tucker Carlson, his dad was like a big media guy.
Yeah.
And he was kind of born into that position where he had a platform regardless of what he said, regardless of what he had to do to get... He didn't have to do anything to get it.
They're not afraid of losing it.
Exactly, and people like Trump too, wherein they don't have to be paid for by anybody other than themselves so they can say whatever they want. But when you get to people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and, you know, the majority of conservative commentators online...
Daily Wire, basically.
Yeah, basically, the Daily Wire is the penultimate example.
Not that they're horrible. I mean, they're espousing a lot of good values.
No, I literally listen to Matt Walsh like most. Like
I listen to Michael Knowles every day.
Yeah, so I'm not shitting on them as people. I'm just saying that the views that they perpetuate are often influenced by people other than themselves. But when you get to the core of most conservative media, I've always felt that there's just kind of a vapidness there. There's a surface level acknowledgement of reality, which gives them a credence that most liberals don't have. You know, they understand the difference between a man and a woman. They understand that when the government suppresses people's right to speak in the way that it's doing right now, we're not on a good track. You know, they understand basic things like that liberals don't understand. But they also leave a very wide open gap between that and what really needs to be said.
The way I see them, a lot of these conservatives we're speaking of, and I want to call them the bought and paid conservatives.
Okay.
If we got rid of the entire democratic leftist establishment, like if for somehow like a Marvel movie, someone snapped their fingers and all of the liberals went away, the conservatives would have had nothing to talk about.
Exactly.
Their ideas are predicated on going against most of these leftist ideas, which I agree with a lot, but that's like 20% of what they should be talking about. They're not providing anything. Like the Daily Wire specifically, all of their platforms, all they're doing is going against this woke agenda. Yeah. Yes, I agree. The woke agenda is destroying a lot of American values. We get it.
Exactly.
Like that's one 20-minute video, and I understand that, Matt Walsh. Like I get it. I'm watching your video. I know what a man and a woman are. You don't have to keep telling me over and over again.
Exactly. And that's where it gets into the term reactionary is very applicable in this situation, because they're not proposing a new program. They're not proposing an alternative. They're just reacting against the trend of society, the trend of culture. Yes. And that deprives them of a substance that conservative people and the working majority, the working masses of America in particular, are in desperate need of. You know, you have on the one side you have liberals who are proposing a new program. They are proposing to use politically charged terms, they're proposing a new world order, something new that doesn't exist and that they're trying to make exist.
Yes.
And Republicans and these conservatives, these bought and sold conservative pundits, are not proposing something new. They're not even proposing a new way of viewing the world.
No.
Yeah, they're just saying no, and then they aren't going beyond that. And what's missing is yes, the no. You have the no to the proposed program of the liberals, but you need a no but or a no and.
No, we should do this instead of that. Which, and was my problem a lot when I was young, and I think that's why a lot of young men move towards more like libertarianism. Because I think a lot of these modern Republicans almost have like a libertarian
I think
view.
the vast majority of them would identify as libertarians.
Yeah, they would. Because most conservatives, I mean, they're pro like legalizing, like you hear it all the time with Republicans. They want to legalize all drugs.
Yeah.
Because like why? Well, it's not the government's place to get involved in that. It's like this like moral apathy. All they want to do is basically not pay taxes and not be woke. And that's not a platform.
The way I see conservatives is that the majority of them want to go back to a time in the past that was simpler, wherein people didn't have these woke ideologies. A lot of them idealize Ronald Reagan and
He had the sauce, we can admit.
he did have some sauce. But, idealize Ronald Reagan and Ron Paul and these figures of the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s before this kind of culture war really got off the ground. But my criticism of that has always been, when you predicate your political program on returning to some prior existing state of being, you either have to deny the reality that prior state of being is what led to this.
It's a primitivist argument.
Yes, it's the same with the argument against people that like Ted Kaczynski. It's like you destroy all the technology in the world and we all go back to living in hunter-gatherer communities. What's going to happen in 10,000 years? Are we not just going to be living in the same thing?
It's almost like we need like a progressive conservatism in a way, which is a bit of a what is it?
Oxymoron.
An oxymoron, but conservatism that we can move forward with and we can actually enact.
Yes, and this is the thing that I see with conservatives is that they get the essence right. They get the essence of humanity correct. But they attach it to the forms in which that essence has been better expressed in the past. So, again, to use a radical example, which translates over to what we're talking about now, but the primitivist argument, they get the essence of humanity, but they attach it and are unwilling to separate it from the form where they perceive that essence was best expressed. So you have a human being has to struggle to survive, and that's where he derives his meaning from, and it's this development of society that robs him of his ability to struggle to survive. Therefore, we need to return to a form that better allowed for him to struggle.
The children yearn for the mines.
Yes, exactly. The children yearn for slave labor and dusting coal off their eyes and working in salt mines.
Technological advancement is always going to happen and always has happened, and it's just a natural course of humans. We create things. We're the sex organ for technology. In a way, and I know that's putting it very simply, but I mean that's what we do. We create better things to make our lives easier, and that's one of the most beautiful parts about us, Yeah. And it's that divine inspiration in a way that we want to make our lives easier, but there are going to be issues with that. And I think the conservative sees the issues that come along with technology and with advancement, and they think that because there are new issues, we should revert back. But there were old issues. The technology we have created has solved those previous issues. We have to keep moving forward in a way, not socially, not that we have to legalize all drugs and things like that, but we still have to. You have to change your model for the changing environment. You have to adapt. It's the base and the superstructure, right? You have to change your superstructure for how the base change. The base is going to change over time.
It's going to develop naturally. And I think a lot of modern conservatism is a reaction against the development of the internet. And because, that's really where it starts. Because you don't really have a huge culture war. And I guess I would say mass media. Yeah. More so than the internet specifically, but
hyper-communication.
Yeah, because you do have the satanic panic of the 80s and the 90s where conservatives were reacting against a very liberal media establishment that was permitting things that went against their values to be perpetuated. Where these conservatives fail is if they were to get their desires, if they were to, like you said, just eradicate wokeness altogether, they would become liberals. They would just become people that support the establishment government and whatever they do. So if Matt Walsh and all the guys from the Daily Wire went back to the 80s before mass communication really blew up with the internet and people were allowed to disseminate ideas that were radically different and bounce ideas off of each other in ways that had never been done before, that led to this, confusion and chaos in the cultural sphere. If they went back to a time that had top-down media control and circulation, they would become liberals. They would be in the Democratic Party. You
see that with Ron Desantis.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, socially he's very conservative, but like a lot of the ideals that he has resemble the Democratic Party. I mean, he's pro the war in Ukraine. He's pro like Taiwanese independence. He's pro like growing this military force, and he's not against these like corporate powers. Like, I mean, Florida's a hotbed for like these corporate elites. That's where they all live because of the tax laws and like the way they can act freely. That's why I don't like DeSantis in a way, is because he resembles this existing structure that we still ascribe to. You know what I mean? If we got rid of wokes, I mean, DeSantis would just be
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton, basically.
Exactly.
I mean,
and that's where a lot of people also get they see the kind of socialism, quote unquote, of people like Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. This kind of like deliberate desire to control forces of the economy in a particular way. They see that socialism and they think that is the essence of what needs to be gotten rid of. But they forget that like all of these people, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, were at the forefront of the fight to free up our market, to allow American corporations to send their production overseas, to escape labor laws. They were at the forefront of this neoliberal agenda, and it goes both ways because George W. Bush was doing the same thing. The only thing that differentiated him was a culture war mindset, wherein he openly embodied a kind of outward expression of Christian conservatism, like flag worship, that kind of stuff. This formalistic expression of conservative values without tapping into an essential conservatism, some essential communitarian element, because he was willing to contribute to the destruction of our economy. That is the base, like again, the base and the superstructure. That is the base of real conservatism, is a functioning economic system wherein people work in a kind of social atmosphere.
There it benefits everyone.
Yes, or it benefits society as a whole.
And I think like the words that we use nowadays have kind of become muddy, like the words for socialism and communism and Marxism and capitalism and these things. Because when we say a socialist country, I think they have this idea of like almost like this weird like hippie commune in the woods where like, everyone shares everything. And you look at these socialist countries, and a lot of they still have like corporate classes. Like, they still have competition. It's just like it's more controlled, you know. And in a lot of ways, some of these countries are more conservative than the United States, like Republican Party.
Well, you look at, again, to use China as an example, the issues that conservatives are most vocal on are the ones that China has openly attempted to, enact into policy. They don't allow the open expression of the promotion of homosexuality and the LGBT agenda. They don't allow pornography. They don't allow these socially corrosive elements of our culture into their culture, and yet they still are capable of harnessing a modern economy. And that's where modern conservatives are failing.
They would not call China a conservative country in any way, which they are.
Even though they are. And you look at a country like Russia or Iran that's doing the same thing without explicitly calling themselves communists like China. But that's the essence of communism. That is what communism is the capturing of the essence of being in a developed base, in a developed economy. So you have what human beings are essentially, because we haven't evolved. We haven't evolved since the dawn of human civilization. We're basically the same biologically and psychologically. So we have an essence to us, a soul, but our environment is constantly and radically changing. So how do you capture that essence in a modern context is the question that I think China has, as the rising global superpower, the rising economic superpower of our generation, I think China has tapped into that. They have figured out, how do we combine the essence with the existing base? How do we build a society that complements humanity while still being open to progress and development?
It seems to be a system that grows human virtue instead of profiting off of like human like sin, and like it's almost like in the United States we see it play out that these parts of us that we acknowledge as the worst parts of us are the parts that are almost celebrated and grow. And
I mean, what month are we in right now?
Literally, I mean, and just to take a tangent, the rainbow, biblically, it was a covenant between God and Noah.
Oh.
God sent down the rainbow. It was his bow. His weapon was the rain, the water, and his weapon was the bow. And he laid down his bow to show that I'm not going to flood the earth again. Like, that was his covenant. Because he flooded the earth for man's pride.
Yes.
Literally. And then so we take that symbol, we name it pride, and like the blasphemy
it's a
behind
total
that,
inversion of
these values
yes.
that we were that in these stories, whether you're a Christian or not, like that story has value because these things repeat over time, and we've learned these things that if you build a society around pride and you build a society around lust and all of these all of these mortal sins, it's not good for your society, whether you're a Christian or not. You could be an atheist and still accept that those things are not good for a society. When you build them around virtues like struggle and growth and responsibility,
honor
and honor, yes, those societies do much better. That's, I think, conservatism is like preserving those values.
And it's interesting to see other countries that haven't fallen to this kind of liberalism that the West has fallen into. When they exude these virtues, when they exude patriotism and courage and a kind of selflessness and a communitarian mindset, a social conservatism, our conservatives are terrified of them. Our conservatives hate them for it. I've seen so many Republicans post videos of like Chinese school children, learning like military strategy in their school and wearing the red armbands and being proud of their country, as if that's a bad thing. And I look at them and I say, isn't that what you want us to do?
You get mad at people for laying the American flag on the ground, but then you'll get mad at them for being patriotic.
For being proud of their country. I mean, and not a pride that in the same way that we were talking about earlier, not a pride in the self, but a pride in the virtue of a body.
Exactly. That responsibility to your nation and teaching that young. When you assume that you can have a nation that's only focused on these material means, and you can allow any sort of morality or any sort of values to pervade your country, and think that will have no effect, is wrong. And we've taken the like metaphysical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, that non-material element out of our politics. Mm-hmm. The idea that a child should be patriotic, the idea that you should have honor and you should be willing to die for your country, or that the idea that it's your duty to have children and to have a family.
The thing about social conservatism is it's not something that has been exclusively held by the right for the entirety of American history specifically. Yeah. I mean, you go back in time, I have family that were big into, they were union organizers and they worked with union, and I believe you do as well.
Yeah, my grandfather was a union rep in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. And my great-grandfather on my wife's side was a big union guy in Kentucky. And if you talk to them, they're not liberals, but politically they're what we would call leftists. They're focused on working class issues. They're focused on taking power away from wealthy elites and putting it into the hands of the people in the ways that were...
It's like collectivism.
Yes, in the ways that were the best expressed and the best utilized in their time period. And the conflation of conservatism with right-wing politics has been a big problem for American conservatives, is because Republicans and conservatives are so scared of enacting political change that actually breeds a positive social environment, that breeds these conservative values, because some of those political changes are associated with historical left-wing causes. Like, I was listening to a podcast earlier today that brought up this point, that a lot of conservatives will oppose things like maternity leave because it's an intervention on the government's part into business. And it's like, well, if you want to breed an environment where people want to have children, where people feel like they can have children without having to be anxious about it, without having to be afraid of what's going to happen, and without having to put them into these institutions that are controlled by the people that you hate, then you have to enact some changes that are what would be in any other circumstance considered leftist economic and social policies.
It's like giving mothers or giving married families money for having children. Mm-hmm. In a way, that's government intervention, and we're going to need taxes to pay for that.
Yeah.
But that's helping these conservative values that people claim to have, mm-hmm. but it's not limiting government. I mean, conservatism is not just limiting government.
No, if anything,
that's it's chopped up to be.
If anything, like if you look at the historical root of what limited government libertarianism is, that is liberalism.
Yes.
And that is what we have now. It's just that when you look at our justice system and how they're handling certain things, especially with Hunter Biden,
even with like allowing people to steal things.
Yes,
in a lot of these major
that's what
cities.
I was going to get into is the kind of normalization of crime and the almost incentivization of crime, the absence of any kind of government authority. We live in a society that is run by liberals. And liberals in the broadest sense of the term. People that don't want the government to step into what they're doing. Why haven't any of the people in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book been prosecuted? Because they're in the highest echelon of our society. They are a part of the elite class that dominates our culture and our government and our economic institutions, and they don't have any laws that actually control them.
We've lost the rule of law.
It's only people that try to instate a kind of real rule of law or authority or social norms dictated by a strong state that are actually suppressed by our government. So we've kind of covered the general state of conservative thought in this country, if you can call it that. I guess I would say conservative media before I said conservative thought.
Capital C conservative?
Yeah, capital C conservative thought or media in this country. I think we've given a general outline of our opinions of what do you think could be done better. We've already mentioned that a aversion to social programs that could embolden real conservative values in this country is something that is probably necessary.
I see really two main issues and two ways we could move forward. The acceptance that we do need a strong government, because I think a lot of these ideas we have now is just trying to get rid of a government as a whole, which, like you said, just creates a breeding ground for liberalism and liberal idea, and also a return of morality to the political landscape. I think there's this common thing you hear, even with religious conservatives, that like the separation of church and state means that you can't bring moral or religious or your ethical values into everything. Has to be very materialistic, you know. You have to have a study to cite to pass a law. It can't be based on morals and what's right, because I mean, how do we prove what is right? You know, that's something that's outside of us. It's with the abortion argument. They say, well, it's going to make mothers better or have a better life. You know, these women that are getting pregnant, you know, they're gonna have an easier life. So to them, statistically, we're showing that like the living people, these people that we can actually get census data from, are having better lives. So statistically, they're doing better. The moral argument is that we don't kill. You know, we shouldn't kill anyone. I think a return of morality and ethics and almost those Judeo-Christian values to American conservatism, and the acceptance that we are going to have a strong government, especially if you want to combat current strong political powers.
Exactly. And one of the arguments that I've always made against kind of we need a smaller government, we need a more libertarian-minded government, we need the government out of this, we need to weaken the powers of the government. One of the arguments I've always thought of in response to that is, well, who's going to enforce that? Who is going to limit the power of government?
Exactly.
And I feel like the answer proposed by libertarians would be, well, the people are going to limit it. And my question is, well, are they going to, form institutions on a popular basis that serve to limit that power of government, that power of the existing state, and they're going to have to be armed in order to do that.
They might have to vote on some things.
They might have to, come up with like collective decisions and
pick a guy to talk for them.
Yeah, and maybe even have some kind of police force in order to constantly be at watch, because I mean the average Joe can't do it all the time.
There's going to be some bad actors in this group, obviously, in any group,
Yeah, and maybe even establish some prisons and the point being, you're going to have to make a government
to fight the current government,
to suppress, or that's a very like primitive way of explaining it. That's not really how it worked. But my point being that in order to establish a society wherein the government is restricted, you have to have a government, and that goes into what we were talking about last episode. It's not that we need the government to be restricted. We need actors that exist within the government to not have as much sway over what the government does. The government is a tool. It's something to be utilized by a group of people. The state is a tool. So it's about seizing the control of that state, seizing control of that tool, so that instead of bashing people over the head, you can build a house. Instead of making kids cut off their genitals, you can incentivize people to have families. It's
instead of the government, instead of the people being afraid of the government should be terrified of the people.
Exactly.
Bring the guillotine back, It's just like you said in China, though. And I mean, if a Chinese lawmaker is terrified to make the wrong decision. Even in Russia, people talk about these Russian diplomats being killed. If you're doing things that are objectively against what the people want and harming the people en masse, I mean, you should be punished for that. If you want to hold the highest office in the land, you should be held to the highest standard of the land.
Exactly. And every infringement upon that office, every infringement upon the people that you represent should be punished with the utmost scrutiny.
So you can give this power to the government. If you have a government that is in total fear of the people, you can give them as much power as you need. Because they know that they can only do what you want with that power,
Exactly.
By the people, for the people, I mean, that was the whole idea, I think, originally in America, I mean, we had military presidents for like the first while because we wanted a strong leader that could actually enact change, We've talked about this before. The executive branch of the United States has just been reduced to a pile of ashes, I mean, it's basically a figurehead at this point.
Yeah, and you have a whole... The real problem, and this is another thing that I feel like conservatives don't get at. They look at the formalistic expression of the government, and they might give lip service to the idea of a deep state. You hear that from conservatives a lot, but they aren't taking that conclusion that there is political actors that are not accountable to the people, to the logical implication of that being that maybe it's not the fact that we have a government that is the problem. Maybe it's the fact that we have a wholly unaccountable government behind our government that is the problem. Maybe it's not so much Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and fucking Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Maybe it's not so much these people that are the actual source of the problem. Maybe it's something behind them, something deeper. You put Donald Trump into power and he got things done. He got some things done, but he was still limited. He was still limited by this shadow state that exists behind our actual state.
We call the president the most powerful man in the free world, and he can't even govern these three-letter agencies in his own country.
Exactly. All the way back to the founding of the CIA and the development of their role in society. You have presidents not being informed. JFK was not informed about the Bay of Pigs invasion. So the CIA...
And he had no choice of whether or not to do it.
Exactly.
When they did tell him, they just said, this is what we are doing.
They're saying, they said, we're doing this right now. And he was like, what?
And you're going to go down for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be on your hands because you're the executive. Even though you had no sway over the matter, you had no authority to stop us from doing this. So from the inception of these institutions, you have an unaccountability. You have something that...
They don't represent the people.
Exactly. When people talk about the CIA in the 60s and the 70s, there's this kind of implication, especially in pop culture, that like, oh yeah, they were doing really weird stuff, and then they just stopped. When you hear people talk about MK Ultra, they're like, yeah, they tried to control people's minds with LSD, and it didn't work, and then they stopped. And it's like, so we didn't figure out that they were doing that until 20, 30 years after the fact, right? What makes you think that they just didn't come up with something else? What makes you think that they stopped because they told you they stopped? So they were totally willing to go behind the backs of the American people to experiment on them in order to gain more control over the population, and then they just stopped.
And when we were finding out about that, they were bringing crack cocaine into black neighborhoods in the United States, which were found out about, 20, 30 years later.
Exactly.
Like, people don't realize that we almost have, like, an aristocratic governing body in the United States that is not elected. They'll talk about the fact that, Putin, the elections are fake. He's just some sort of aristocrat that's there all the time, and he tends to kill all these like politicians. Is that not what we have? And except theirs is just more transparent.
It's more open that's how a government works.
Did he not get rid of the KGB?
No, they still have a secret service.
I don't think it's a newer one.
Yeah, I don't think it's called the KGB anymore, but the real difference between someone like Vladimir Putin and our politicians is that the executive power in Russia actually has some sway. The executive power in Russia actually has some authority to do something in the government. Like, Russia's economy was devastated after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The 90s were some of the roughest times in Russian history. That's where you get, this image of Russia that Westerners have.
Dilapidated condos. And
this almost post-apocalyptic, everybody's on drugs and people are dying and it's a terrible place to live. Putin fixed that in Russia. Putin was he is a political strongman, and he utilizes the government in a very authoritarian way, but he does so in the interests of the Russian people.
And until recently, it was like a tourist destination in Russia.
Yeah, it's
a beautiful place to go.
Nice place to go, and people didn't have any problem. Just the last administration, even earlier in Joe Biden's administration, nobody really had a problem with Putin.
Yeah,
it was only
he was a mean guy, but so was Trump.
Yeah, it was only when he stepped against NATO and the interest of this international ruling class that he became a problem. Mm-hmm. And I think
his policy hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's just a logical continuation of it. Okay, we have Russians in this part of the world that's not necessarily within our, legally ascribed borders, but they're nonetheless Russians, and they need protection from this state that has been at war with them for almost 10 years now, because the Maidan coup happened in Ukraine in 2014, and since that was the start of the Ukrainian civil war.
It was the Crimean War.
That was
conflict or whatever.
Yeah, because that was the invasion of Crimea was a response to Maidan, where the Crimean people had a referendum and said, we don't want to be a part of this new government that has taken control, and the Russians stepped in and made that happen. And the same thing is happening now, just in continental Ukraine.
Exactly.
But it is still, Putin's actions are still an extension of his policy of using the state as a means to protect and better the lives of Russian people.
Conservatism.
Preserving
the rule of law. Like with the Brittany Griner situation. Mm-hmm. Everyone was so mad, and they wanted to make it about the fact that she was gay. And it's black. Like, no, she brought drugs into a foreign country where they're illegal.
Yeah. She brought something illegal into a place where they're illegal.
She trafficked drugs across international borders. Of course they arrested her.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? And then they're like, well, they want their arms dealer guy back. I mean,
well, that's a good deal.
That's a great deal. I mean, that benefits Russia. Do you want them to make a deal that does not benefit Russia?
If anything, you should be criticizing to their credit, a lot of conservatives did this, and where you should be criticizing the Biden administration for,
like, why do we care about this girl?
Yeah, for making such a one-sided deal with Russia. So you're going to give this guy who has obvious, like, even if I think he's gone on record saying that the allegations against him are not accurate. Mm-hmm. But regardless,
I don't understand the whole idea of a nuclear arms dealer. Like, does Russia like they have a drug dealer?
I thought he was just a regular arms dealer.
But even that, this is Russia.
Yeah, surely they have other avenues.
Surely they can just make their own. Like, the idea that they probably just wanted the guy back just as a show of force, of power in the world, just to say, hey, screw you. Like,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. We're going to give you this completely insubstantial pop culture figure that nobody even heard.
And you're going to beg for her back.
I didn't know who Brittany Griner was.
She's
until
in the
she got
WNBA.
Exactly.
I can't name one WNBA team. Let alone a player.
and Russia gets this significant political actor
just to show, hey, this is how misguided you are as a nation. Like,
this is how terrible your government is.
Embarrassing to the United States.
We're making good deals, and you're making bad deals, and it's not even it's not even a question of
you got your pothead back, and we get the guy we've wanted back for a long time. You know, they win that political game, and for anyone to say that they're wrong for that, for doing, I mean, if you ask Russian citizens, I'm sure they would all be happy with with winning the deal. They want their nation to do better. I mean,
well, you criticize. I mean, people will point out that they on a personal level think that Russia's elections are rigged, but I think that there's definitely a case to be made that our elections are rigged, and even in that case, we still only see people winning with like 51%. Where in Russia, maybe they're rigging their election, maybe there's some influence, but Putin in the last election won like 86% of the population.
Like, people would know. If it was that rigged.
It's like if everybody didn't vote for Putin and then Putin got 86% of the population, you'd think people would be like, wait a second.
If he was this oppressive warlord that like just murders people in the street and hangs people and everyone's starving and everyone, like, the idea that you can have a nation where for that long, like, how long has Putin been in power? Like 40 years?
No, not quite that long. I want to say 20.
It's been a couple decades. Yeah. That long. Like a modern fighting age man's whole life. Mm-hmm. If people have been mistreated for that whole period of time, and you think that like there's been no sort of resistance or anyone really, except for outside from NATO, to overthrow that government or to change it in any way, and he's still getting 80-70% of the vote every election cycle.
And his approval rating is above average for, at least compared to American politicians. What you're saying plays into a wider criticism I have of conservatives in that they all exhibit this kind of civilizational racism, where they think that the people of the East are somehow, and I'm talking about Chinese people, Russian people, Iranians specifically, but the people that make up the non-Western bloc that is forming, they can't think for themselves. They live under an oppressive government that's brainwashed them, and it's like, bro, you want to rob these people of their humanity so hard that you think that they can't think for themselves? You think that they can't just act in their own interest?
If they don't have the exact same political framework we have, they have to be
brainwashed
and
literally. Yeah.
Although it's working better than ours, and they're objectively like more in agreement as a nation than our nation is, and they have less infighting, and they're doing better on a international scale.
In spite of economic barriers that don't exist for us. Iran has been since the Iranian Revolution, Iran has been under international sanction, like from all around. The entire circle, it has been circled by people that it is not allowed to trade with. It's not allowed to participate on the international marketplace. It's not allowed to, get resources from the majority of producing countries in this world.
But they're starving because of their Islamic values.
Well, and that's an argument for the early days of after the Islamic Revolution. But then you look at them now, and it's a modern country. With all of the barriers put up in front of it. It's like watching Iran and the United States in their trajectories right now is like watching Usain Bolt, jump over like 57 hurdles on a track, and then watching like fucking
Joe Biden walk up a flight of steps.
Exactly. Dude, you're doing basic human functions and you can't figure it out. Well, meanwhile, this guy has the entire world against him, and he's managing to do fine.
It's almost like the entire nation is working together to do something, and they have like similar values that work,
and that they've consistently kept out intervention from foreign countries.
You keep trying to stomp out the flame, and it just keeps coming back. And it's a lot of these Middle Eastern countries that have these similar values. I mean. Is it Iraq or Afghanistan that's had war in their like an invading power for the last 2,000 years? For like 2,000 years. But if you leave Afghanistan alone, I guarantee you for 100 years they'll be a completely modern.
Give it 100 years now. They finally have an actual independent government.
If you just leave them alone, like. The idea that, like, oh, well, they're all goat herders and there's no education and there's no schools, and it's like, maybe if you stop bombing them for 10 years.
Yeah, they could develop... it's the same argument with people, in the early 2000s criticizing Iraq because ISIS is popping up. Oh, there's all this tribal warfare. It's a terrible place to live. Well, maybe you shouldn't have bombed them into the Stone Age. That's a quote from one of our heads of state. That's what we did to Iraq, was bomb it into the Stone Age. And then you're like... They don't even have running water and basic infrastructure. Well, yeah, no, you're right, they don't.
Yeah, they have to live in the mountains where you can't find them, and they can't build infrastructure, because if they go out into the plains, they get destroyed by the American government. Mm-hmm. And when they try to tell you that they don't want these American values, which, fine, they don't have to. Like we said in previous episodes, if there's a country that has completely anti-American values, but that's what they all vote on, that's their right as a nation to have that. That's different from them coming to a nation's doorstep and trying to actively engage in conflict with them. Then, yes, then we're protecting American values. Mm-hmm. But just because somebody on the other side of the world is doing something that we don't exactly agree with doesn't mean that we have to go there and tell them that they're wrong. And like you said, it's almost like this. It's like almost like racist, or I don't even know the ethnicist or whatever. You know what I mean? Because the term racist is kind of a weird term, because
but it refers to, and I mean,
the term in itself
culturally
is
what, it's weird
to imply that there are different races of humans in itself is racist, which is why I've always thought it's like a weird circular
prejudice
term. Yeah, because it's different.
But it is. I will point out that it is directed against mostly
non-Western,
the East. Yes, non-Western.
They're all dumb.
Yeah.
Basically, even though they score higher than our children, and
exactly, even though by all intents and purposes they're smarter than most of us, they're dumb because they let their oppressive government walk all over them. It's like, how do you think? And it's so ridiculous that the points, the places wherein we point out, like, oh, they have oppressive governments and they let them do whatever they want, and they won't stand up for themselves, and we need to step in and help them, are all places that have had violent revolutions in the past 100 years. The Bolshevik Revolution in 1918 overthrew an existing government and was enacted by the Russian people. The Chinese Revolution kicked out the Japanese, overthrew the nationalist government, and established its own government. The Iranian Revolution in the 70s did the same thing. So you're telling me that a people who for Iran specifically, within the past 50, 60 years, literally, that's less than a generation.
They went from goat herders to a modern economy.
They went from goat herders to a modern economy, and they overthrew a government, but now for some reason they don't feel like it, even though they're oppressed. It's like, dude, you're the one. You're talking about yourself.
And it's these to get back to like an earlier point. It's a lot of these like modern Marxists, whether they be conservative or leftist, that they espouse Marxism, will say that we need to go and help them.
Yes. Yes, they're standing on the side of American imperialism. They're standing on the side of, we really need to, even if it's not a military
we need to save this working class from themselves.
Yeah, we need to save the Iranian women from being oppressed. And you have people like Donald Trump, who is, like we said, Tucker Carlson's an outlier in the American conservative sphere. So is Donald Trump, going on record and saying, Iranian women want to wear hijabs. What is that our business? How is that our business? And it's stuff like that. That's the main problem with conservatives, in my opinion, is their willingness to accept a kind of civilizational prejudice that robs people of other countries of their humanity, of their ability to self-actualize and act on their own interests.
It's not, you have to be absolute in your conservatism.
Yes.
Like allowing other people to have their own conservative values and conserve their cultural values, because we do have different cultures. Mm-hmm. I think that's, to get back to like the original point of, as conservatives, what should we do moving forward? I think it's to reestablish that there are values, there are different values. In the United States, there are values, and to fight for those here. And not for this like globalist, capitalist idea of the only thing that really matters in the world is how much money we have and what our GDP is,
Yeah.
People would talk about that with Russia, that like their GDP was like lower than...
Okay. It's like that.
But everybody had food.
And people say stuff like that, and they're like, "Oh, but I'm not a liberal." Bro, you're a liberal. You're literally making the liberal argument.
You're a libertarian.
Yes.
You might be fiscally conservative, so you're different than the American capital L liberal. But you have. I mean, you're liberal.
Yes, and your value judgments are on the same basis.
Exactly.
Like,
you're creating your own ethics. It's like corporate ethics.
Yes. And one of the main things that I think conservatives really need to push for, like not just a mindset change, not just something, but what they need to say, what they need to embrace and express to their audiences, because there are conservatives with huge audiences that have political influence. Matt Walsh was pretty much the spearhead of that Bud Light boycott. You know, they have some influence. Why are you more worried about people being gay in school? And I mean, I'm not to say that that's a good thing, but why are you more worried about that? It's a symptom of a larger issue. Yes, why are you more worried about that than the politicians you support wanting to go to war with foreign countries? Like, that is nothing. Like, people teaching weird shit in school. Bro, take your kid out of school. You know, I know it's hard, but I'm not that well off, and I'm not putting my kid in school. Like, exactly. It's very doable.
And in a way, I think conservatives have had the wool pulled over their eyes in this country. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, this is an issue.
Yeah.
They know it's an issue in a way. And I think if I was a corporate elite pushing for this global institution, I would love for these conservatives that might be the only people to actually combat me inside of U.S. borders, at least.
Yeah.
To be more worried about gay people.
Exactly.
Than what we're doing globally.
It's divide and conquer. It's the same thing that they've done for generations. Except now, instead of it being on racial lines, it's on the lines of social liberalism. Like, how open are you to gay stuff that was basically pushed by the progenitors of this ruling class? And people like Ron Desantis, when they frame who the enemy of the United States is, you know, he said it openly. He thinks that the greatest threat to American democracy is the Chinese Communist Party. People give him credit. Conservatives give him credit for cracking down on Chinese foreigners owning property in Florida. You're worried about the Chinese government owning property in this country. What about the vast swaths of land that are owned by BlackRock? What about the vast swaths of land that are owned by Bill Gates, that are owned by Americans, that you have some authority over, that you can do something about? You, as a politician, could actually enact some kind of change in regards to how much land these people are hoarding and not using, but instead you're worried about tiny percentages of land owned by Chinese immigrants or foreigners.
And a lot of the places that are being bought up by Chinese companies, from what I've seen, are like they're bringing industry to the United States. A lot of these places that are being built are like industrial centers, factories, manufacturing. They're bringing jobs to the United States in a lot of places in higher rates than the American government.
Exactly, they're doing what our government has failed to do, and you want to scapegoat them as the enemy. You want them to be anybody who thinks that any foreign nation is the biggest threat to America that we are facing in this generation is delusional to some extent.
Like, the biggest threat is inside of America.
Exactly, your biggest threat is your own state and who controls it.
And it's a wonder why we are helping Ukraine so much and we correspond with them, with their values, quote unquote, so much. I mean, they're a endlessly corrupt nation.
Yeah.
That their biggest threat is inside of Ukraine.
Yes.
Or outside in the United States. But it's the same people.
Mm-hmm.
Their biggest threat, the Ukrainian people, and the American people's biggest threat is this Western corporate elite.
Exactly.
Just as a lot of nations. I mean, even in England, we saw they were like, we're getting out of the EU. We're getting away from a lot of these things. I mean, they want to be English. They want to preserve that Anglo-Saxon cultural traditions, you know, and that's their conservative right to do that.